Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the askST at NLB video series brought to you by the Straits Times and the National Library Board. These monthly sessions aim to answer the burning questions that you have for the topic of the day. To those who have submitted your questions, thank you very much for sending them in. I'm David Fogarty and I'm the Climate Change Editor for the Straits Times. And with me today are ST photojournalists Mark Chong and Lim Hiao-Hui. Today, we will discuss ST's work in bringing the climate change story to life in pictures and videos from Singapore and internationally. So welcome Mark and Hiao-Hui. Now, climate change is affecting all places on the planet, and Singapore won't be spared. Indeed, Singapore has experienced some extreme weather impacts over the years, such as floods, heat waves, and rising sea levels, as well as extreme tides. So could both of you share some examples of extreme impacts that you've seen in your work here and abroad? Mark, perhaps we can start off with you, if you can just share some examples.
Sure. So as photojournalists on the ground every day, we kind of not see it all, but as in we are always out and about. So a lot of times, a lot of these weather patterns that we see, right, are happenstance on assignment or on the way to assignments and all that. So, in Singapore, you don't see the very drastic, visually you don't drastically see the effects of climate change, but you still see certain weather patterns. And in Singapore, we have, generally it's heat and rain. So like, for example, this first image here is of a lady who is, obviously using her sweater to shield herself against the sun. And this was just taken while I was walking to another assignment, actually. So I think a lot of times we have to try to get a variety of pictures when it comes to showing all these different weather patterns, because it comes out very often. Like, for example, this shot by a colleague of ours, hot day in a marina barrage, extreme measures for extreme weather, fan and umbrella, also taken while walking to another assignment. And this one as well was taken very recently at East Coast Beach. I guess this happens more and more now, but just a very quirky image of a man sun tanning. And then of course this was, I took this a couple of years back. We were tasked to go and shoot a hot weather picture. So I went to the barrage to find people playing in the wading pool, but then I saw a kite instead, so that was pretty interesting. Of course, besides heat, you have rain as well, and then I think nowadays increasingly there are more rainy days and the rain is getting a bit more intense as well. So this was taken actually 2 weeks ago during one of our wet spells, taken from a vantage point at Queensway actually. So like I mentioned just now, a lot of times is trying to make interesting pictures of weather patterns. So this was taken by a colleague of ours as well, during a very rainy day a couple of years back. Taken recently was also this picture of extreme weather during one of those rainy days near Sunset Way actually. The canal was really full of water. I think a couple of hours after this it was almost reaching the brim. Also taken very recently, flooding near a private estate 2 years ago, taken by our colleague Chun Liang. So this kind of stuff, you increasingly see it nowadays with these crazy weather patterns. Yeah.
Now, Hiao-Hui, could you also share some of the pictures you've taken? I believe you also have some pictures of heat, drought, and even coral bleaching that you've taken.
Yes, so last year Singapore had the second driest February since 1869, and temperatures hit as high as 34 degrees Celsius. So I have a photo of a worker, he's watering the dried up plants on the roof of the Green Pavilion in the Singapore Botanic Gardens. Back in 2019, the water levels in lakes and ponds had receded due to the dry weather. So some examples that I shot include the Eco Lake and the Symphony Lake at the Botanic Gardens. And the other photo is taken at Pasir Ris Park, showing a dried up lily pond. So coral bleaching occurs when the water is too warm, forcing the corals to expel the algae living in their tissues, exposing the limestone skeleton. So I will photograph the bleached corals during the intertidal survey at Sisters Island back in June 2016, when there is the longest major coral bleaching episode due to the El Nino phenomenon recorded in Singapore. Sometimes hot weather and heavy rain can work together, leading to algae bloom. The nutrient runoff from land due to rain and the sun provides an optimum condition for the algae to grow back in 2005 at Marina Bay. Due to the rising sea level, we may also see higher tides and some of our existing infrastructure may be affected. I photographed this partially submerged mangrove boardwalk at the Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve during the 3.5 meters high spring tide back in January 2015. In 2018 February, high tide of 3.3 meters at East Coast Park also caused seawater to overflow the banks of a few drains.
Now, the Straits Times has also documented climate change impacts overseas, including South Africa and the Arctic. So, Yahui, could you share us some of the pictures from your very moving trips from South Africa when it was in the grip of an historic drought? I think you travelled there in 2018 with ST Environment correspondent Audrey Tan as part of the Climate of Change series. So what did you see while you were there?
Yes, I travelled with Audrey to Cape Town in South Africa, which was suffering from sheer drought that almost resulted in the taps being turned off. The moment we arrived at the airport, we saw signs and banners reminding travellers to help the city to save water. No water ran from the restrooms at the airport, and we were asked to use hand sanitizing gel instead. So 50 litres of water was the amount that each Cape Town resident could use a day, and which is about a third of what each person in Singapore uses daily. At Newland Spring, we saw people queuing to fill containers with spring water to add on to the 50 litres of water a day from taps at home. So, and swimming pools were empty and closed. We also saw low water level at the Waterslough Dam, which is the main supplier of drinking water to Cape Town. In restaurants and universities, people were asked not to flush the toilets.
Oh, gosh. Now, Mark, you visited the Arctic in February 2020 on a trip to Svalbard in Norway, and also saw the consequences of a warming world firsthand, from melting permafrost sort of undermining foundations and destroying them basically, to the growing threat from hungry polar bears who can no longer hunt so easily because a lot of the sea ice is disappearing. So perhaps you could explain a little bit more about what you saw on that trip. Okay,
so this trip to the Arctic was kind of course it was a once in a lifetime trip. We were supposed to go there for a climate change conference, but we extended since we were already in the Arctic, right? It takes really, really long to get to Norway. The reporter and I, we then flew to this place called Svalbard, which is the northernmost place where people live in the world. And it's kind of maybe, I would say, a 2 to 3 hour plane ride from mainland Norway itself. So it's still under the Norwegian government. Yeah, so this place, Svalbard, it's very famous for obviously stuff like the Northern Lights, dog sledding, and polar nights, something where you get complete darkness for a couple of months during like winter. While we were there, it was during the end of polar nights. So as you can see in this picture, I think this was taken maybe, I'd say 2-3 p.m. in the day. So it's not completely pitch dark all day long, but it's different degrees of darkness, but still dark. Yeah. So when you think of the Arctic, you think of, hungry polar bears on thinning ice, but Svalbard is not only just about that, While we were there, we got to see many of the other aspects of climate change. The other famous thing about this place, which is probably more well known to the world, is the Global Seed Vault, as you can see here. It's a pretty trippy looking place. It's situated on top of a hill. It's the place where you have 1 million seed samplings stored and collected from all over the world and placed in there like a doomsday vault, just in case anything happens to the world. It's kind of like an insurance for this food. Yeah, so one thing that we saw very clearly when we were on Svalbard is the melting of permafrost. Permafrost is kind of like the foundation of where the ground is perpetually frozen because of the low temperatures. And as you can see on the picture, it's houses being demolished, and that's because the ground is no longer able to hold the houses, so they had to demolish this whole bunch of houses. And besides houses being demolished, the only cemetery in Svalbard was also kind of closed for a very long time, as you can see. So melting permafrost also leads to landslides as well, which is very dangerous. Okay, so this picture is of a teacher in the high school in Svalbard, and he was doing what you call polar bear watch. What he does every morning is he'll go out, he takes turns with other teachers, he'll go out, he'll survey the compound, or rather the periphery of the compound, looking out for polar bears. And that is something they have done for quite some time now, but they have been more vigilant as of late in the last couple of years because there has been more polar bear sightings. That is also because there is lesser ice for the polar bears to stand on to hunt, and when you have that, they come into the land to forage for food. Yeah. And one thing I think about Svalbard is because it's so far away, ironically, their carbon footprint is very high because a lot of times when they get their food, when they get supplies, things have to be flown in. And that's something they're trying to change. So one guy, this American guy called Ben Vidmar, he set up this place called Polar Permaculture. It's a greenhouse in Svalbard, and he was growing stuff like bean sprouts, tauge, right at the end of the northern tip of the world. And those are some of the things they're trying to do to improve food sustainability and to decrease carbon footprint. So the Arctic trip was a really interesting one, and a real eye opener,
Okay, that's great. So closer to home, both of you are often out and about in Singapore, which is forever evolving and developing, to get ready for the future. So Yahui, you have some images of deforestation. You're quite passionate about nature. So tell us a little bit more about this and why forests are important for people and for climate change.
Yes, I love nature, so I'm always on the lookout for stories related to nature and the environment. So one day I was on a double-decker bus, then as I was traveling, I saw the clearing of land and trees from a familiar hill next to Budo Reservoir, which is near my house in Tampines. So I always wondered how long this mountain of earth will remain. And 1 week later, I went to a nearby HDB block to see the extent of the development, and this is what I saw. In Pasir Ris, I read people commenting about the clearing of trees near Pasir Ris Park for the Coastal Grove BTO and whether some big trees will be kept. It's just next to the Sungai Api-Api, which has mangrove habitats. In Bukit Batok, I also read about the clearing of trees for BTO flats and went there to check it out. So trees reduce greenhouse gases when they take in carbon dioxide from atmosphere and store it as wood. They reduce ambient temperatures and provide shade. They're also known to improve both air and water quality by absorbing pollutants, releasing oxygen, and reducing soil erosion.
So it's important to note too that, yes, Singapore has lost areas of forest, but I think the government also has a significant tree planting program as well, sort of 1 million trees. And some of the trees that are lost, like some of the busier trees, I think are invasive species. So there's a balance here. It's not nice to see deforestation, and it does make areas hotter. But if it's replanted, I guess it's not as bad as other cities where they just clear the land and leave it at that, right? Yeah. So I thought we'd talk about solutions. We've talked about impacts. So solutions are very important because it shows that we can do something about climate change. Essentially, climate change is not all a doom and gloom story, which is very important. There are lots of solutions from around renewable energy to green buildings, plant-based foods, and Singapore is a showcase for all of these solutions, I would say. So, Yahui, but just back to you again. You have a great example from the Tengah floating power plant. Can you tell us more about this, please?
Okay, so the Sembcorp Tengah floating solar farm is one of the world's largest inland floating solar PV systems, covering 45 hectares and spreading across 10 islands. This solar farm will produce 60 megawatt peak of energy, enough to power around 16,000 4-room HDB flats for a year. So I wrote into PUB first to check whether I can check out the construction of the solar farm back in November 2020 for a standalone photo, and it expanded into a photo essay with interactive graphics online. So after the recce shoot in December, I went back several times to track the construction progress, as well as milestones for the photo essay, which was out on May 17. So in order to spend more than 2 hours at the construction site, right, I had to go for COVID swab test every 2 weeks as required under the RTT program, which is a BCA requirement at that time. So this solar farm will contribute to Singapore's plan to install at least 2 gigawatt peak of solar PV capacity by 2030 and help to reduce dependency on fossil fuels and thus carbon emissions.
So enhancing nature, such as expanding mangroves along the coastline, is another valuable solution. This was part of another project that Mark, you also did with Audrey, looking at what nature can teach us about rising sea levels. Tell us what you saw and why it's important.
Okay, so essentially what we did was we set out to record the coastal necklace of Singapore. kind of the different coasts which make up whole of Singapore, north, south, east, west. So we wanted to show not only the variety of shores that we have, but some of the natural solutions for combating sea level rise because of climate change, and also some of the initiatives that people have been doing to help improve these natural habitats as well. One such picture were the sandy shores of East Coast, and of course mangroves. So mangroves are great absorbers of carbon dioxide, and Singapore actually has an abundance of mangroves in different places, especially along Kranji, Sungai Buloh. So we followed this bunch of students volunteering as part of the environment club at the university to plant mangroves every couple of months at Sungai Buloh. And of course, Singapore, we also have rocky shores in Labrador Park, very near the PSA terminals. Very interesting place actually to look at marine wildlife during low tide. Yeah. This picture was taken on Lazarus Island. We followed a bunch of scientists. They were doing some studies along the sloping seawalls, which also help with sea level rise. The studies were to do with how they could grow corals, or whether they could improve the conditions and growing of corals along these seawalls. Yeah. Besides mangroves, rocky shores, and the beach as well, we have the Mandai mud flats, very near Johor. Very interesting ecosystem. Yeah. Okay, so one such adaptation that we have made in Singapore, along with the natural solutions, is we've enhanced certain things. Like, if you can see in this picture, these are called geobags, which are sand-filled geotextile containers which help with the sand erosion. Because, you know, Pasir Ris Beach, East Coast Beach, you have the waves, you know, hitting the shores constantly. So sand erosion is very common. So these bags are placed there by NParks to really help, along with the other seawalls that they have already built there. Yeah. Another seawall at Coney Island, yeah, where fishermen like to go. Okay, so besides natural solutions and adaptations, we also have completely man-made ones, like the Marina Barrage. If you didn't know, that's also one of the places where it helps kind of prevent certain water levels. Yeah. Okay, so this interestingly is part of what you call occasion. This is part of the construction of Tuas Port. So occasions are basically retaining structures to which are placed in the water before the land surrounding within it is filled to make reclaimed land. So occasions now, for the new Tuas Port, which is supposed to be complete in 2040, they built it 5 meters above sea level, just because you know, of sea level rise. Yeah, so that is one thing that we are really drastically taking. One of the measures we're drastically taking. Okay, so I mean, I like to talk about the kind of the visual aspect of how stuff is laid out also. So, you know, how do we make a story like this kind of pop? So big kudos to the layout artists who did this, because we're trying to show the necklace around Singapore, right, like the coast. So what we did is we worked closely with the sub-editor, and we came out with kind of like a map. So if you can see in this picture, it's like Sungai Buloh is here, Pasir Ris Beach is here, Marina Barrage is here, just to show the whole entire coastal necklace of Singapore with a variety of images. Yeah.
I think it was very, very well received. So you touched on adaptation, and that's kind of the last of the 3 chapters I wanted to mention. Climate change sort of impacts have got to the point where we have to adapt, right? And even if we stopped burning fossil fuels, there's still enough greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for heating and climate impacts to sort of continue for several decades. So no choice, we have to adapt. So higher seawalls, I guess, is one thing. And we've seen in Singapore, deeper drainage is another. Stormwater holding tanks, so large underground storage tanks to take flood water. And also, of course, raising the height of newly reclaimed land for particularly for key infrastructure. So, for example, T5 at Changi Airport. Now, Yahui, you recently visited Changi Airport, where I believe they've been installing new equipment to detect and deal with flash floods, for example.
Yes, Changi Airport is built on higher ground above mean sea level, and the future Terminal 5 will be built 5.5 meters above mean sea level. Just last month, I went to Changi Airport to shoot the new sensors, which use radar to monitor the water level in drains that have security grills installed at the airport's drain network to prepare for fresh floods caused by intense rainfall, climate change and rising sea level. So each sensor is fixed with a CCTV to monitor the drainage situation. When the water level in the drain exceeds 60%, the Changi Airport Group's engineering and development team will be alerted. So then workers will be sent to clear any debris such as leaves, grass cuttings and plastic trapped in the grills, blocking the flow of water back to the sea. In 2016, a detention pond with a capacity of 216 Olympic-sized swimming pools was built for flood protection. So it will hold runoff from Terminal 3's airfield and the airport's public roads that is released at low tide into the sea.
Now, Mark, you've already touched on caissons out at the very large concrete retaining walls, I guess, which are put out in sections at this new port in Tuas. So, and you've just done a feature on that. Perhaps take us back, in some more detail into what you saw.
Yeah, so caissons are really quite magnificent structures. They weigh kind of like maybe I think it was 10 A380s, and they're like 20 meters tall. So in order to create these structures, it takes a week or so just for one structure, but very interesting structures, very underrated structures.
And there's hundreds of them, right, that they put in long rows into the water. Right?
Yeah, so like one caisson, if you can see on this picture now, it is really, really huge, but you imagine around 220 of them making one long retaining structure for land to be reclaimed. So they're placed around like a U shape, and then land is filled using various materials.
Now we would like to take some questions from our audience. What are some of the challenges capturing climate change images? Mark or Yaohui, who wants to go first?
Perhaps I can touch on it. Like when flash flood can occur anytime, then whenever there's rain, right, our bosses will want us to go to the location to shoot, and it happens in a really short time, so we really have to rush there, and sometimes we are not really prepared for such heavy rainfall, and our shoes will get wet, and we have to find ways to protect our equipment from getting splashed by the water or the rain. So sometimes I just have to hold umbrella in one hand and shoot with the other hand.
Right, but you also have to make sure you don't get caught up in the flood as well, right? Yes. Yeah. So, Mark, I mean, you see something that's perhaps an extreme impact. How do you sort of conceive of the shot or compose the shot? What are those sort of challenges that you come across?
I guess the main challenge about creating visuals for climate change stories is the ideation part, where you want to translate all this sciencey, complex stuff, not to simplify it, but to make it more approachable, to make it more, in order to make it more well received. I think in Singapore, because we don't have, we don't see polar bears on drifting ice. You don't see, typhoons. I mean, touch wood. But so I think in the Southeast Asian context, we kind of, because there's a difficulty, we kind of work closely with reporters to come out with longer features, image packages to make it more strong. Like
the coastal necklace example.
Yeah, that's right. So and then nowadays increasingly we're working more with video, we're working more with the art teams, the graphic teams, and as well. And I think it's important because all this is value add, kind of to make a story more. And of course, you want to cater for the kids as well, because that's the future generation, right? And in order for them to receive it well, you don't want it to be too, you don't want it to be too wordy and all that kind of thing. So I think now we're taking more interesting stance where you have cartoons for kids, simpler videos for people to understand. So I think that kind of is the challenge, and that's how we are maneuvering around it.
Now, Yaohui, you've already touched on the issue of logistics of taking shots, particularly during extreme weather episodes. So flash floods, you've given one example. Perhaps could one or both of you sort of share the nuts and bolts of getting out there and taking pictures of, it takes a lot of effort.
For hot weather, you just have to really prepare yourself, drink lots of water, and you try to look for images that show like people perspiring and carry fan when they're walking in the street. So you really have to walk the ground and see what's happening, and also maybe for dry weather you can see dry patches of grass. So you have to try different angles, go explore, like go out HDB blocks and see. Then you can have a large overview of how dry the field is.
So just as a final question, what sort of message do you think you can give through these images, or what message do you think these images should be saying to people about climate change?
Hopefully in these images you can see the beauty of Singapore and what we already have, but obviously you also see the impacts of what climate change has had for us. So I think climate change is closer to home than we actually think or we actually perceive. So I really don't think we should take it for granted. I think what I can say is do what you can, do what is affordable, do what is feasible, but at least do something lah.
So from these pictures you can see that climate change is really happening and it's not something to be ignored. Even though we are not like big companies who can build solar farms and all the energy saving features that you do in the offices, but we can take little steps like save water or even teach our kids about the trees, and you can do some gardening at home.
Okay, great, that's great. And I would just like to mention that at the National Museum of Singapore is an ongoing exhibition called Through the Lens, featuring the work of Mark, Yahweh and other ST photographers looking at the impacts of climate change and what Singapore, although it's a small place, what it's doing to combat climate change. So that's an ongoing exhibition that continues on until after Chinese New Year. So when you get some time, please go and take a look. So thank you, Mark and Yahweh, for sharing your work and joining us today. And thank you for watching this episode. We hope you found it as enjoyable as I did. This session is part of the askST at NLB series, brought to you by the Straits Times and the National Library Board. To watch past videos or listen to podcasts, check out the link below. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and healthy.